Gonzaga's top remaining target in the 2025 class, Isiah Harwell, is narrowing down his options. Will he end up in Spokane?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. As the playoffs are winding down, the sports are not sporting the way we want them to. This is one of the slowest weeks in all of sports throughout the year. FanDuel, though, they are hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There is something for everybody every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. All right, folks, Luka Krajnovic, he is headed back home to Croatia. We're going to talk about that. Timme dominated for the Sacramento Kings in the Summer League on Monday. We're going to talk about that as well. Zag Baseball had another player selected in the MLB draft. We got it all and more on today's show. But first, we lead with some updates on a pair of 2025 prospects the Gonzaga Bulldogs are pursuing, starting with the name most familiar to the Zag fan base. That is Isiah Harwell, the 6'6" guard out of Pocatello, Idaho, who plays at Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah, same high school as Nolan Hickman. Harwell has been on Gonzaga's radar for a very long time. He came to campus this past season for Gonzaga's win over Santa Clara on February 24th. A well-regarded prospect in the 2025 class. He is number 10 in the class at 24/7 Sports. He is number 7 in the composite rankings as well. Generally considered a top 10, top 15 prospect by all of the major recruiting services. And Harwell has finally announced the top 4. The top 4 schools for Isiah Harwell are Gonzaga, California, who he recently visited, Houston, and Texas. No North Carolina. They were pursuing him. They're out of the picture. No Idaho State. Not a super serious threat, but they were on his top 9 as a school that is where his father played in the 90s, was very successful there. Gonzaga, Cal, Houston, Texas. Those are your list right there. As we said, Harwell visited Gonzaga in February. He visited Cal about a month ago, and he is setting up visits to both Texas and Houston. It is a fair point to wonder if Gonzaga being the first visit is actually going to work against them in this particular recruiting battle, is the best way to put it, I suppose. Typically you want to be the last place people visit. It's fresher on the mind. They're more likely to remember the things that they liked about campus, the teammates, the facilities, the campus life, the whatever events they participated in over the weekend with their fellow recruits or with the players on the team, whatever it may be. You kind of want to be the last place people remember, the place that is freshest on people's minds. Harwell's not going to have that opportunity. He visited Gonzaga back in February, and he's going to make his decision on September 12th. That is the date he has confirmed. He's making his decision September 12th. He will have visited both Houston and Texas by that point, so we'll have had all 4 of the schools on his top 4. He's been on campus, but again, at that point, Gonzaga will have been 7 months ago. Cal will have been about 3 months ago. Houston and Texas, depending when he gets these in, will be somewhere between 2 months and a few days before he makes his commitment. So he's going to have a better memory of those 2 programs than he does of Gonzaga and Cal. But he's been connected to Gonzaga for a long time. And on one hand, the school you visit first and the school that has been recruiting you for the longest and is a school that you have connections with, you're local to, having being from Idaho, there's a lot of pros and a lot of benefits that Gonzaga has in this recruiting process. The connection that Harwell has with Nolan Hickman is something we've seen show up a lot on social media. We've seen Harwell, retweeting or retweeting on Instagram, sharing on Instagram videos of Nolan Hickman when he has big games, things like that. Like, they're clearly close. There's a connection there. I think that the high school connection certainly helps. The local connection of Idaho and Eastern Washington certainly helps. Right now, it's pretty up in the air. It feels like Gonzaga has lost momentum. And in fact, On3 has treated it as such. I've referenced On3's predictive rankings quite a few times on the show. I always use the caveat that they're just a guess. You know, I'm not saying that the folks at On3 don't know what they're talking about. They certainly do, but you're still guessing, and you're still ultimately making a prediction based on the volatile mind of a 16, 17-year-old high school student. So it changes pretty rapidly. We saw Nick Kamenia was up 76, 77%, going to go to Gonzaga. That has dropped. Doesn't mean he's not coming to Gonzaga. It just means that the odds felt really high at that time, and they have dropped since then. Similarly, Isiah Harwell has long been favored to go to Gonzaga. That is no longer the case. And in fact, I thought Cal was going to jump Gonzaga. He had a positive visit at Cal. He has a close family connection to members of the coaching staff at Cal. I think that helps a ton. Cal's now moving into the ACC, which is a huge benefit for them. They can say, hey, look, you can come to Cal. You're going to get to play North Carolina and Duke and Virginia and Clemson and all these great programs. And that's a selling point that they now have that they didn't have when it was the Pac-12. And the selling point wasn't as strong for the opponents that you're going to play. However, the school that has actually jumped Gonzaga is Houston. Right now, On3 gives Houston a 29.1% chance of landing Isiah Harwell, while Gonzaga is second at 19.3%. Once again, these rankings are volatile. They are predictive. They are people who are plugged in, who are communicating with recruits and coaches and whatever, but they are still guesses. They're still just guessing. Having said that, not a great sign. We're not going to pretend that we're not going to try to put a super positive spin on this. It sounds like Isiah Harwell's lean has moved away from Gonzaga. But there are still 2 months before he makes his decision on September 12th. That is plenty of time for Gonzaga to make a push. We also don't know if Gonzaga's interest has changed. I doubt it. He's a top 10 recruit in the 2025 class. Gonzaga's not going to move away. I know some people said, well, Gonzaga landed Davis Fogel. I feel like Fogel was more of a reaction to potentially not getting Isiah Harwell and Jalen Harrelson, who they've long not been expected to land. Whereas I don't think they were like, okay, we're going to go get Davis Fogel, and then we're not going to continue to prioritize landing Isiah Harwell. That would be a dumb decision by the coaching staff and not one that I think they are making. I think more than likely they are feeling like Harwell's maybe leaning the other direction, or they just felt like, hey, Fogel's the guy who's rising, and we want to land that commitment now. Let's get this kid on campus. Let's get him committed. Let's get that done and dusted so we don't have to worry about it anymore, and then refocus on Harwell and Kamenia and the other guys that this staff is prioritizing in 25. So I wouldn't read anything into Davis Fogel committing to Gonzaga. Having said that, it does feel like the lean for Isiah Harwell has changed, and that if he does end up committing to Gonzaga, it will be a swing back in that direction, because right now it seems to be trending in another direction. Wanted to quickly mention another player Gonzaga is targeting in the 2025 class. That is center Julius Halifanoa. He recently did an interview with On3 talking about the schools that have offered him, the schools that have reached out and contacted him. Gonzaga has been on the periphery of this recruitment for a while, so wanted to toss it out here. Halifanoa, for those who are unfamiliar, we have talked about him a few times on the show, but not in a while. He is a 7-foot, 290-pound center from the NBA Global Academy in New Zealand. Big dude, connective big, likes to make passes, is definitely a distributor, more of a pass-first center at his size. He's worked very hard to get more athletic, to be able to stay on the floor a little bit longer. He talked about that in this interview with On3. Most of the recruiting services don't rank him because they don't rank international prospects. On3 does have him ranked 33rd. In the class of 2025, they have him as a 4-star player. So this is a talented player. He also has mentioned that North Carolina has reached out to him. Kentucky has reached out to him, Gonzaga and Georgetown. He mentioned those 4 schools when asked about who has pursued him. Now, the report from On3 doesn't indicate that North Carolina or Kentucky have made him an offer. It does say Gonzaga has offered him. I'd point out that 24/7 does not say that Gonzaga has offered Halifanoa, so I'm not exactly sure. Offer data is not super reliable all the time, so we don't know 100% whether Gonzaga actually has a formal offer to Julius Halifanoa for a scholarship in the 2025 class or not. What we do know, once again, using On3's predictive metrics that they use, they have Xavier as the favorite to land Julius Halifanoa. In fact, they have Xavier at 51.6%, followed by Virginia Tech at 45.1%. Again, neither of those programs were mentioned directly by Julius Halifanoa. He was talking about the high-profile programs that have reached out to him. It's nice to be included on that list, even if Georgetown was also included on that list. Not exactly a high-profile program anymore, although historically a great basketball team. After Virginia Tech, Gonzaga is next at 1.2% odds, followed by Georgetown at 1%. For Gonzaga, Ismaila Diani really feels like the young, big developmental piece for Gonzaga. Bringing him in, obviously he'll be here this upcoming season, but the plan is for him to be a multi-year guy. That is probably Gonzaga's focus in the front court. They'll need to prioritize other bigs in the future. Obviously, we know Ben Gregg's about to play his final year of college basketball. We don't know if Graham Ike is going to be gone after this year, but there's the possibility that this is his final season. So we'll have Braden Huff, we'll have Ismaila Diani. We know Michael Ajayi is done after this year as well, and he's expected to play some small ball 4. So there is some room in the front court in future years, and adding a big center in 2025 certainly doesn't feel like a bad thing for Gonzaga to do, just to give them some more depth in that area. But it's never really seemed like Halifanoa is a huge priority for the staff. And based on this interview and kind of the data that we're seeing, I think that's probably still the case, but certainly a name to keep an eye on for Gonzaga fans. Folks, Luka Krajnovic finally has his new home, and it's back to his old home. He is headed back to Croatia after one season with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We're going to talk about that and the other Gonzaga transfers where they have, or at this point have not landed in the transfer portal. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I don't like weeks like this. I don't like when we don't have baseball outside of the All-Star game. We're done with basketball. We're done with hockey. Football hasn't started yet. We got WNBA. We got Olympics coming up, but that is about it right now. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day all summer long. If you want to support Coach Few and watch the Olympics with a vested interest, currently Team USA has minus 480 odds to take home the gold. Or if you're a big believer in Team Canada, Kelly Olynyk, Andrew Nembhard, they're at plus 1100 to win the gold. You could make yourself some big money if Canada is able to pull that one off. Head to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about Locked On College Basketball. Most of you know I am one of the co-hosts for the Locked On College Basketball podcast alongside my friend, Locked On Tar Heels host Isaac Shade. It's been going on we're about to enter our 3rd season. If you haven't checked it out yet, give it a listen. Make it your second listen of the day. Locked On Zags, first listen. Locked On College Basketball, second listen. Talking all sorts of great stuff in our sport. Talking about the NCAA tournament, Summer League stars, all sorts of great stuff going on at Locked On College Basketball. Check it out if you have not done so yet. Wherever you find Locked On Zags, you can find Locked On College Basketball. Want to move on and talk Luka Krajnovic, Gonzaga's freshman point guard from last season, who has officially found his new home. Krajnovic has signed with KK Kedavida Jr. in Zagreb, Croatia. He's going home. He's going back to Croatia after 1 year in the United States, 1 year at the college basketball level, 1 year, of course, with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Krajnovic played 16 games as a freshman last year in Spokane, averaged about 8 minutes a night, 3 points, 1.5 boards, about a half an assist, was 52.5% shooter from 2, about 33% from 3. Krajnovic missed 9 games in the middle of the season. He missed the UConn game on December 15th and came back in late January. He missed those games with a broken hand, suffered in shoot-around before that UConn game. He also just never really got a consistent spot in the rotation. Mark Few's pretty stringy with the amount of players he plays in his rotation, and last year's team didn't have a lot of guard depth, but even still, Krajnovic didn't really carve out a lot of minutes. We ended up seeing Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman play 40 minutes a night somewhat regularly in the early part of the season, at least 38, 37 was kind of a slower night for those two guys. Krajnovic showed some flashes. 6'5" guard. We saw the athleticism. We saw the ability to navigate the pick and roll. He had some issues on defense, but most freshman guards do. He was also a player who didn't join the program until August, so he was just kind of playing catch up the whole time, trying to get ready for the upcoming season. And we kind of expected him to take on a bigger role next year. Be a guy who could maybe step into a legitimate rotation role, play 10, 12, 15 minutes a game as a backup guard, give some more rest for Hickman and Nembhard. But then On the day of the transfer portal deadline, Luka Krajnovic enters the portal. We see his name pop up just right before the deadline hits. And it sounds like this was a decision not necessarily made by Luka Krajnovic himself, but a decision made by the coaching staff. They cannot force players out necessarily, but I believe that there was a conversation had where they basically said, hey, we are hoping to use this scholarship for other players. We don't anticipate necessarily a lot of additional playing time for you going forward. We think it might be best. I'm paraphrasing how I think this conversation went. I don't know the exact specifics of it, but from conversations I've had, from reading the tea leaves, it definitely wasn't a decision where Luka Krajnovic left on his own volition. There was some conversation had with him by the coaching staff that helped him make that decision. Let's put it that way. Part of the very obvious case in point was that Khalif Battle committed to Gonzaga very shortly after this happened. Gonzaga needed a scholarship. They got a scholarship. Suddenly they add Khalif Battle. After that, they also add Emmanuel Innocente. They add Ismaila Diane. They add Braden Smith. Like, a lot more moves happened after that move. Gonzaga is now using all of their scholarship spots. So they felt like they needed this spot in order to bring in some of those other talents. And that's a rough part of the business. It's a rough part of the modern college basketball game where the transfer portal is so prevalent, and you can make these kinds of additions in the middle of the offseason, which you didn't used to be able to do. So it can create some situations where guys kind of get pushed down, they get bumped out a little bit. And this is unfortunate for Luka, who I think is very capable of being a Division I college basketball player. I don't know what kind of interest he got in the offseason. There was rumors about him going to a school in Illinois, not Illinois specifically, UIC, I should mention, but those were just rumors, and we don't know how serious they were, where they came from necessarily. But now he's headed back home. He's going back to Croatia. He was very, very good in Croatia before coming to Gonzaga. He played in the Croatian Premier League for a school club called Basko. He averaged 17.5 points a game, was all league in 2022 prior to coming to Gonzaga. So a lot of talent there. Happy for him. I hope this is a place that he's going to be happy playing. I'm going to continue to track his career because I really liked the upside. I liked seeing him in a Gonzaga uniform. I think he was a fun player. I think he was an exciting player. I think it's kind of sad what happened to him. I understand why it happened, and I don't think that there should be any vitriol there, but it's just kind of an unfortunate side of this new business of college basketball. Krajnovic was not the only Zag to hit the transfer portal this offseason. He was one of two that was on a scholarship last year, the other one being Pavle Stosic, the other international player, I should say, that Gonzaga brought in late in the offseason last year. Krajnovic committed in August. Stosic didn't commit till late September, after the school year had already started. It was a very late commitment for Mark Few and the Zags. Stosic never really got off the ground at Gonzaga. He wasn't expected to play a big role even when he committed, but we saw barely even garbage time for him. He played 47 total minutes for Gonzaga last year across 14 games. He scored 14 points, had 11 boards, 3 blocks, 2 assists, and a steal. And he has committed in the transfer portal to Utah State. Joining the Mountain West, joining the Aggies, another new coach for them. Danny Sprinkle came and went like a whisper in the night. He was there for 1 year, kept them afloat, brought great Osibor with him. They were great last year, earned an 8 seed, got smashed by Purdue in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Sprinkle bounced to Washington. Now this team is going under another rebuild, another new coach, another new roster, and Stosic is going to be in the mix. And I'm incredibly curious to see what his role looks like. My guess is it won't be significant. I don't think he's going to go from not playing at all at Gonzaga to playing a big role for a Mountain West program. But I hope he's in the rotation. I hope we get to see him develop and grow. There was a lot of excitement about Pavle Stosic. He was kind of a tweener, not big enough to be a center. The power forward skills, we didn't really see whether they were there. We know the athleticism was there. This guy could jump out of a gym, but was he able to play away from the rim? We just didn't get to see it. Again, he played 47 minutes. You can't really get in a whole lot about 47 minutes when I would guess 47 of those minutes came in garbage time. Like you're not gaining a whole lot of insight. I didn't see practices, so I don't know what he looked like there, but I would love to see him have some success at Utah State. I think that'd be really cool. And they're a program that's now on my radar to check out this upcoming season to see how he does. Other Gonzaga transfer was Colby Brooks, who was a walk-on who graduated from Gonzaga. So he's a grad transfer. He's got a couple years of eligibility left. About 2 months ago, Tobias Bass of The Athletic posted a top 5 list for Colby Brooks, or I should say it was a 5 schools that have reached out. I don't know if it was an actual top 5 or not. Those 5 schools were Denver, Portland State, Cal Poly, Cal State Fullerton, and Drake. Since then, radio silence. Follow Colby Brooks on Instagram so I see updates. Looks like he's living his life, having a good time, but don't know if he is still actively looking for a Division I scholarship, if he is still going to continue to play basketball, if he's looking D2, D3, what the situation is for Colby Brooks. I don't know. I'm excited to let you know when or if we find out anything on that situation. Would be very cool to see a walk-on at Gonzaga transfer and end up as a scholarship student athlete at another Division I school. I would love that. I said it on the show before. If he's at Portland State, I'm going to games because I live not that far from Portland State's campus. Cal Poly, I got a buddy who works there. Denver, I got a buddy who works there. So 3 of the 5 schools on this list I have a close connection to. So it'd be very cool to see him end up at one of those 3 schools. But really, I just want to see where he ends up. So definitely something to keep an eye on going forward. Since we're talking Gonzaga transfers, I'll just mention real quick, there are 4 other players who are going to play college basketball next year who were members of Gonzaga's roster at one point. Oumar Ballo, of course, a Gonzaga player a couple of years ago, spent the last few years at Arizona, is going to spend his final college season at Indiana in the Big Ten. Speaking of Big Ten players, Dom Harris is going to be in the Big Ten as well at UCLA. He, of course, was at LMU last year. Will now get a chance to play for Mick Cronin's team and will face Gonzaga at the Intuit Dome in the non-conference slate. Gonzaga could face Oumar Ballo as well if they end up facing Indiana in the battle for Atlantis. Hunter Salas is at Wake Forest. He's projected to be a legitimate All-American this year. Tremendous season last year. Surprised he didn't stay in the NBA draft process, but excited to see what he can do with another year for the Demon Deacons. And then Marcus Adams Jr. never actually played at Gonzaga, but was on the roster briefly for a time. He then transferred to BYU, spent last year with the Cougars, is now at Cal State Fullerton to be closer to his family. His dad is ill. It's a very sad situation for Marcus Adams Jr., hoping that he can find an opportunity to play big minutes for Fullerton and have a healthy, successful season and potentially move on from there. Well, folks, we're going to close out the show talking about Drew Timme's Summer League performance for the Sacramento Kings. We're going to talk about the 2 Zags on the Boston Celtics and another Zag getting picked in the MLB draft. All that coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are moving on to talk some Summer League updates. For those of you who listened to Tuesday's episode, we talked Julian Strother and his dominant performance for the Denver Nuggets. He had 25 in his first game, 32 in his second game. The reason we didn't talk Drew Timme, Killian Tilly, or Anton Watson is because I recorded that show before their 2 games between the 3 of them that took place on Monday evening in the Summer League. Those games have now happened. So we're going to talk about those 3 guys and how those particular games shook out, starting with Drew Timme, who was excellent for the Sacramento Kings on Monday night in Las Vegas. 19 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. It was vintage Drew Timme getting to around 19, 20 points a game on super efficient shooting. Timme was 8 of 12 from the field, a perfect 3 of 3 from the free throw line. This was vintage Drew. This is the guy that we saw at Gonzaga for 4 years. This was the player who is the all-time leading scorer in Gonzaga basketball history. This version of Drew Timme, lights out. He was an absolute force. And the great thing about this game for Drew Timme is that we didn't just see him dominate on the block. We know Drew can do that. I know that. You know that. NBA scouts, general managers, they know that. Everybody knows that Drew Timme, you get him the ball on the block, his footwork, his patience, his angles, all that stuff is excellent. We know that. But Drew demonstrated more offensive versatility in this game. He demonstrated that he can take the ball away from the rim, that he can make passes. He can be a connective big, looking at backdoor cutters, dribble handoffs, all sorts of actions like that. He can set ball screens. He can be more versatile offensively than just going and standing on the block and posting up and rearranging his positioning until a guard gets him the basketball and then he scores. That's what he did at Gonzaga, and he was darn good at that. Darn good at that. Better than anybody's ever been in that program at that. But that's not a thing that happens in the NBA. NBA teams don't want to sign Drew Timme, put him on the floor, and funnel their entire offense through him on the block. They don't want to do that. They're not going to do that. So Drew has to demonstrate more offensive versatility. Can he set screens away from the rim? Can he pick and pop and hit little jump shots? Can he make the right reads and make good passes and generally kind of force defenses to guard him away from the rim because of his passing abilities? He demonstrated in this game, yes, he can do that. Drew still has some pretty significant things he needs to work on the defensive end of the floor. I think the concern for Drew is that he is not laterally quick enough to be a switchable big, and he is not a strong enough vertical athlete and rim protector to be particularly valuable in drop coverage. And if you can't play him in switch coverage and you can't play him in drop coverage, what do you do with him defensively? And ultimately, that is an issue that, if it is not resolved, will severely hamper his ability to stick in the NBA. PJ Carlesimo was on the call for ESPN, longtime college basketball coach, took Seton Hall to a Final Four, was an NBA coach as well. He was talking about Drew Timme, said he saw him a lot in college because he lives in the Seattle area. He compared him with Vlade Divac, which I love that comparison. That is extreme high-end outcome for Drew Timme. I don't think he was saying he's as good as Vlade Divac, more just saying he's similar in that he can play away from the rim and make passes and things like that. But it's nice to see people giving Drew his flowers and praising him for his performance in this game, because I think he deserves more consideration than I think he's getting. We know the flaws, we know the concerns, but the upside with him is still really high. And I loved seeing him grab rebounds and dribble all the way up the court and make passes to hit open three-point shooters. Like, he displayed a lot of different things in this game. And if he continues to do that, NBA teams would be stupid to not give him a call. Let's talk about the two Celtics who played the Los Angeles Lakers on Monday night, Anton Watson and Killian Tillie. Watson played 23 minutes for Boston, 7.7 boards, an assist, a steal, and a block. That is a pretty great Anton Watson line right there. A decent amount of points, decent amount of boards, a little bit of everything else. Also insane levels of efficiency. 2 of 3 from the field, 3 of 4 from the free throw line. His only miss was a 3-point attempt. Less concerned about missing a 3. I'd like to see him take a few more. Brad Stevens, the general manager for the Boston Celtics, would also like to see him take more 3-pointers. That was a big point for him, was, hey, we want to see you get comfortable with that outside shot, be able to contribute in that area. So he played great defense on Bronny, closed out, got a steal, got it up to Baylor Shireman, flew down the court after that. Baylor turned around, kicked him the ball on a bounce pass. He laid it in. It was a beautiful play. Displayed kind of everything you love about Anton Watson. Causes a turnover, makes the right read on the pass, hustles down the floor, gets himself an opportunity to score around the rim and puts it home. That is Anton Watson to a T right there. He keeps doing that, he's going to find himself in the NBA. He's already got a good shot at getting a two-way contract with Boston, but he keeps playing that well. He keeps displaying those different skills that he has. He could end up on a standard NBA contract as well, which would be great, because if he gets a standard contract, maybe our guy Killian Tillie gets one of those two-way contracts. Tillie played 12 minutes in this game against the Lakers, 8 points, 2 blocks, 2 boards, 2 assists. Not as efficient as a shooter. He's 3 of 8 from the field, 2 of 5 from 3. Like seeing him shoot 5 3-pointers, like seeing him make 2, that's 40%. That's going to get you in the league. For him, get him back in the league. 12 minutes, you'd like to see him play a little bit more, but I liked what we saw from Killian Tillie in this game. He had a pair of blocks. He's still got some work to do defensively, but I like that he was able to rotate over, get those blocks. I like that he was taking those 3-point shots. That's what he's there to do. That is what he is there to do. I hope it's not Watson or Tillie for getting a spot with the Boston Celtics. Watson would have the edge as the player that they are more invested in, having used a draft pick on him. I think Killian Tillie could end up signing somewhere else if he doesn't stick in Boston, but it was nice to see both these guys have a nice game against the Lakers. Closing out the show, talking baseball briefly here, Liam Paddock selected in the 18th round with the 529th overall pick in the 2024 MLB draft. There's 20 rounds, so he was towards the back end of the draft here. He's a left-handed pitcher from Gonzaga, selected by the Chicago White Sox. He becomes the 54th player under Coach Mark McTough to get selected in the MLB draft. Last year, they had 2, Owen Wild, right-handed pitcher, who went to Tampa Bay, and then Brian Calmer, a first baseman who went to the Chicago Cubs. Paddock spent just 1 year with Gonzaga. He was a transfer from Spokane Falls Community College. He was from Coeur d'Alene High School initially, spent 2 years at Spokane Falls, came to Gonzaga last year, made 12 starts for the Zags through 65 innings, had 77 strikeouts, and held opponents to a .235 batting average. All those stats led Gonzaga last year. He was also the WCC Pitcher of the Week in mid-April after a dominant start against the Dons of San Francisco. Love to see Gonzaga continuing to put players in the minor league baseball ranks. We'll have more baseball coverage later later this summer as we get out of the All-Star break. We'll talk about how Marco Gonzalez is looking, Eli Morgan's looking, some other guys who might or will get the call into the major leagues here this summer. It's going to wrap it up for me today here in the Locked On Zags podcast, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Got some fun stuff coming your way later this week, so definitely stick with us here on the show. Don't forget to join the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It is free to join. There's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Until next time, though, as always, go Zags.